Happiness is beautiful, it's a kind reality. Happiness is the highest good, happiness is free. So let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy.
Welcome to the Happiness Show. This is George Ortega. I'm here with Lionel Ketchian, and we're here to talk about happiness, because happiness is, always has been, and always will be the point of it all. Okay, let's begin the Ketchian and Ortega Happiness Dialogues show number 5 with a consideration of how our thoughts are related to our happiness. Lionel, why don't you get us started on it?
Okay, that's a profound statement, how our thoughts related to our happiness. I wonder how many people make that connection, that our thoughts could actually be related. And the way some people work it, they would think that that's absurd. I mean, how can my thoughts have anything to do with my happiness? Because my happiness is based on what happens to me, right? That's pretty much how we think about things. But actually, it works just the other way around. It's not what happens to you, it's what you think about it. In fact, even when a situation occurs in front of you, let's say, you know, it could be a fire, it could be somebody telling you something negative, whatever the case might be, it's really not the situation, but it's what you tell yourself about the situation. So it's how you communicate and how you respond to the situation. So naturally, George, people get stressed because the way they react to the situation is not happiness, but stress and confusion. And so what do you get? Unhappiness. All it starts with is a thought first.
That's true. That's very true. Let's present a bit of the history on that. Actually, this idea goes back to the Greeks. You know, Marcus Aurelius, the Stoics, etc. And then back in, I think, the late 50s, early 60s, two psychologists, Aaron Beck and Albert Ellis, actually developed therapies based on this idea. They're called, in Ellis's case, rational emotive therapy, and Beck developed cognitive therapy. And yeah, it's the idea that, like, we tend to think that, like, an event happens and we have an emotional reaction, right? That's like, you know, and then that would, like, relate to our happiness, because, like, you know, something happens, we have an emotional reaction, and that would determine our happiness long term. But these guys, you know, based on this Greek idea that you were referring to and all, basically made it a point to include that middle component. You know, again, it's not right that the event happens and we have an emotional reaction. It's that an event happens and we evaluate it or perceive it in a certain way, and that's what leads to our emotional reaction.
Yeah, it's in that moment. It's in that split moment where we think about it, and then we actually respond negatively, and that's why unhappiness is not the best strategy to be using, because it puts us in an unempowered state.
Right, and the idea is that also, like, you know, we do have, sometimes we think to ourselves, well, we don't have a choice in this. We don't, you know, these thoughts come into our minds, and, like, we just have to think them. But you know, a lot of the way we respond to what happens is habitual. You know, the milk spills, somebody will get upset, another person will say, the milk spilled, you know?
Very true. And you're right, George, it is habitual. We are conditioning, so we come out of our conditioning almost always in thinking that we're dealing with a problem, but what we're really doing is we're being manipulated by a problem. So we take something that we don't like, and then we add confusion to it, and we add our upsetness to it, and it's not the best mix, and it's certainly not a good strategy to be using in living one's life.
That's very true. Thoughts, you know, again, thoughts will determine our level of happiness, not just for the moment, but for the long term, because what happens is that our happiness is based on how many pleasant emotions we have to a great extent, and how few unpleasant emotions.
Yes, yes. You know, going back, you started by saying, of course, this goes back to the Greeks, George, and you mentioned Marcus Aurelius. Now, Marcus Aurelius wrote Meditations, correct? And he was the emperor of Rome, right?
Yes.
Yeah, at one time he was the emperor of Rome. Now, interestingly enough, he was the emperor of Rome, and who do you think he learned happiness from? Because that's what we're talking about here, and that's what they were learning. He learned it from a former slave called, his name was Epictetus, and Epictetus was the teacher of Marcus Aurelius. So here's a slave teaching the future emperor of Rome how to live his life. And it's rather interesting because this slave who's been written about, and I consider history, you know, will probably consider him one of the greatest men to ever live, because he was hurt while he was a slave, he was disabled and crippled, and yet he really rose up to empower himself to really overcome any obstacle, any challenge presented in his life, and even to go from slavery back then to teaching the emperor of Rome. Now, I think that's an incredible statement of the power of happiness and what it can do for us. And then when we move on to the present day, when you talk about the psychologist that you referred to, Albert Ellis, for example, who's written upwards of 80 or 90 books, and who's still practicing today at age 90-something. He's a psychiatrist. He's interesting because he kind of breaks it down to talking about happiness, and he says that we have to get over being troubled by things. You know, I forgot exactly the terminology he uses, but you know, his emotional way of looking at things is he has a phrase for it. You have to stop being disturbable about things, because when you get disturbed, think about that word. Disturb means you're sort of going crazy. So you're allowing your thoughts to drive yourself crazy. You've got to develop a better way to respond to life, to the complexities and challenges. Yeah,
that's very true. One of the things he points out is that basically we sometimes have this kind of philosophy that we apply to situations, and we think to ourselves, well, things should be a certain way. You know, the world should be a certain way. We should be a certain way, you know? And of course, you know, the world isn't like that. We're not like that, right?
Right.
But we have these expectations, and a lot of times, then the distance, the discrepancy between our expectations and what's actually happening creates those kinds of disturbances. Our mind is saying, you know, like, wait a minute, it should be this way, but it's not. And so he advocates that, hey, all right, it's not the way it should be.
Right.
But what we're advocating is he doesn't really go as on point as we do in this. What we advocate is, as long as we're very happy, you know, then the other things don't necessarily matter. I mean, if we have to take care of our family or friends, if we have to do things, you know, we can still do them without losing our happiness. But again, as long as we're feeling happy, then it doesn't matter how much of a distance there is between the way things should be and the way things actually are.
I think you're right, George, and we're sort of tending to treat things as reality. I guess the other point is, when we have a lot of rules about the way things should be, that's very nice if the world would just follow our rules, you know, but the world doesn't quite respond to what our rules are, and when that happens, guess who's left holding the wrong end of the stick? We are. In other words, we beat ourselves up with our own rules, especially when life won't respond or people won't respond to what we want. So we make ourselves unhappy by imposing rules on reality that may or may not happen. And this is really what you're talking about.
Yeah, and if we want to have rules, how about if we just have one rule or a couple of rules to be good? Because, you know, being good, I think, is important, not just to our happiness, but to the happiness of other people, you know, helping other people to be happy, you know. But, you know, if we want to have one rule, let it be that, you know, we should be happy. You know, we should be very happy regardless. You have an expression, you say we should be happy no matter what.
Right, no matter what. I think that's very true, because it gives you the ability to come out of a presence of mind. When you're happy, you're in a presence of mind, you're balanced, you're clear thinking, you're focused, you're at peace, and you have all that to come out of to really see what your best choices are. And in an unhappy state of mind, you're pretty cloudy on what's happening, because all you could see is the problem, and you're looking down, and you wouldn't even see the solution if it was, you know, if it fell in your lap.
Oh yeah. You know, you made a very interesting point before. You made the point that the person who taught Marcus Aurelius was actually a slave. And that's very good, because we were talking about intelligence, I think, last show or the show before, and the idea is that happiness, you know, this ability to control our thoughts and to realize that our thoughts control our happiness is accessible to us all, regardless of our level of education, our intelligence, because this is a simple realization.
Yes, it is. It is. It's true. And really, when you think about unhappiness, if you trace unhappiness to its beginning, you know, if you try to follow it back to your to its root, you know, in your own life, when you feel unhappy, if you follow that back either a long way or a little way, you're going to find a negative thought somewhere that triggered it. And when I do some work with people, sometimes I find out that, you know, they say, gee, today I'm not having a good day. I'm just, you know, bombarded, maybe 30,000 negative thoughts shooting through my brain, the same 30,000 negative thoughts. But when you really trace it down, you wake up in the morning, that particular person woke up in the morning, they had a negative thought, you know, they heard it knocking on the door, they let it in, and all of a sudden they're consumed with this one negative thought that wasn't really theirs. But they started thinking about it, and that was the mistake. What you think about is what you're going to experience. So if you allow negative thoughts to come in, thoughts are thoughts, but when you invite them, and when you start entertaining them, and you start thinking about them, then fear begins, and obsessiveness begins, and then all of a sudden you're in a downward spiral. So it all starts with what you're thinking about. So if you feed yourself good thoughts, and you don't let the negative ones come knocking, you know, or you don't answer that knock, it's like email, you know, you just put a filter on it. Then you don't have to experience the negative. You start living in a different experience. You start having happiness happen more to you because your thinking is guiding you to what you want. So you experience what you set up to experience. This is pretty much what happens to us.
That is very true. The idea is that, like, you know, our happiness is not just about not experiencing unpleasant thoughts. And right, if we evaluate things in a positive, productive way, we're not going to experience the unpleasant thoughts. But as you were referring to, like, there is a downward spiral if we feel and think negatively. There's also an upward spiral.
Yes.
And this has been demonstrated scientifically. What they'll do is they'll put subjects in a good mood, okay, through different methods, music, affirmations,
right,
and then they'll record the kinds of thoughts that they have when in these moods, and subjects will be less able to remember unpleasant memories. They'll be more able to remember pleasant memories. So the idea is by you know, it's not just controlling our negative thoughts. It's also like being so in touch with the idea that happiness is our goal, is the point of our lives, that we focus on it and we stay on it, and we create those positive thoughts, which, as you were saying before, are going to prevent us from going to the negative thoughts. And you know.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, George, you're so on the money here, and basically, we can't prevent bad things from happening. And I mean, we have to make the distinction between the problems we come to face in the world, which are the problems more or less. I mean, some are more severe than others. You know, like you and I were talking about the stress of this time of year, and well, we're handling it maybe better than we have in other years. But there are other kinds of stresses, and there are other kinds of problems and miseries and suffering that occur in the world. And that's always going to happen, more or less. How we deal with it becomes how we use the wealth of happiness. And I'll give you an example of what I'm talking about. Just the other day, a woman that comes to Happiness Club meetings called me and wanted to share with me that she lost her husband 2 weeks earlier. Now that's a very significant challenge for someone, to say the very least. And of course, most people go through, I mean, when people are living together all their lives, because this was a person who was beholden to an eye, and I just make that as an example that this is a person who's had a lifelong mate. When she's lost her mate, she said to me, she wanted me also to know that even though the loss was tough, she's been assimilating it, dealing with it, coping with it. She wanted me to know that coming to the Happiness Club meetings gave her the power to deal with this and to finally realize that, first of all, there was nothing she could do about it. And so she realized that happiness must come first, that if her husband were alive, he would want her to be happy. And she's telling me about how she's winning, really. And that's happening, I think, because one of the things that I'm about is giving people permission to be happy. A simple thing like that. When's the last time someone gave you permission to be happy? I'll give it to you. If that's what it takes, you got it. But it's your responsibility to be happy. And that's where the thinking occurs. You know, we always say we'll be happy when life works out so perfectly that it obeys all the rules we set. That's never going to happen, is it?
Oh, no, no. And I think death is the perfect example, because that is something that will happen to us all.
Yes.
And, you know, so the idea, yeah, is that we have these notions about death that affect how we react to it. You were saying, you know, like, you want to give people permission to be happy in the midst of death, and that's very important, because I think sometimes, because death isn't talked about much in society and in schools or institutions, you know, many of us are unclear as to how to react. We know that many of us become sad because, you know, a lot of times, you know, if it's a spouse, we've lost our most significant source of happiness, and that's major. But then a lot of people, I think, feel that, well, you know, aside from that, in general, like when someone dies, that's an event that has to be, you know, very suffered.
Yep.
You know, that has to be suffered.
Okay.
Now, I go back to my Jewish training, and this is actually Judeo-Christian, because the Christian tradition is similar. The idea is that when we die, we go back to God, to heaven, you know, and generally we're in a better state than we are now. So, so in terms of, you know, our thoughts or feelings about the other person, then, you know, we really have a good basis, a good tradition to say to ourselves, listen, you know, the person is blessed. He's been blessed by this experience. Then we have to deal with our own emotions, right? And
That's right.
And as you were saying, you know, when death comes close to us, we have to remember, we have to say, all right, this person was a source of happiness for us, you know, for myself, whatever. But the person's not there anymore, and there's nothing that can be done, and the only thing that can be done is to continue to seek happiness in other ways. You know, and regain that happiness, and again, as you were saying, a lot of it is about permission, about, like, you know, having the thought that yes, we have permission to grieve a person and be respectful for the fact that someone's not with us anymore and has died, but to be respectful to ourselves and continue, you know, to serve ourselves well by being as happy as we can.
That's very true, George, and I think I do more smiling when you talk, because I agree with what you're saying, but you know, happiness is like a light switch away, and it just you know, the light does not go on because you turn the switch. It goes on because you choose to turn the switch. It's that quick with happiness, and we don't turn the switch. We live in the darkness most of the time. We're waiting for someone else to turn the switch on for us. It ain't going to happen. So I think happiness is a profound revelation, one that probably people, which we'll talk about in other shows, don't understand the relevance of, the importance of, the impact of. But if they did, they would use it all the time, as you and I are learning to do more and more in our lives. One thing I want to bring up, with all this talk, people are listening, and they're going to say, oh, this sounds all well and good, and maybe they don't use happiness like you and I do, you know. The question always comes up, and if there's a psychologist out there, he's asking us this question. I can almost hear him asking the question. Are you guys in denial with happiness? I mean, aren't you fully, you know, if you're happy or if you get happy, you're not fully comprehending the situation. What do you have to say about that?
All right. Well, we don't have too much time to deal with it in this show, but no, let's begin.
We'll talk about
that. That's a very good question. The short answer to that is that yeah, things that are negative will happen, but we are even hardwired. We are like biologically driven to seek pleasure. So that if a person says to me, well, if you're not experiencing the pain in life, you're not experiencing life in its full, the answer to that is, well, yes, that's true, but I'm experiencing my most biologically strong drive and need, to feel as much pleasure. Because, I mean, sure, there is pain in life, but it doesn't. Just because there are experiences in life that are painful doesn't mean that we have to experience them or seek them or even value them more than they should be valued.
Boy, George, that's a great answer, and one I totally agree with.
Okay. Now, we're going to introduce a new segment to our shows. We've just brought a new person into the show. Her name is Amy Branch, and she's a psychology student, a PhD student from San Francisco, California. So at the end of each show, we're going to start with what we're calling West Coast Happiness, the West Coast Happiness segment. All right? So, so about this time, basically what I'm going to do is turn the show over to Amy, and sometimes she may have a guest, be interviewing someone, and then she will be closing out the show. All right, so I guess let's go over to Amy right now.
Dr. Anandi just produced a movie and is also a producer, and I was fortunately to meet him the other day, and I was so struck with his sense of overwhelming positivity. I thought he'd be perfect for the happiness show. So George, let's just start off by asking you about how did you reach this level of positivity?
Well, I don't think it's something that you reach for. You just kind of work for it through, I guess, different means. I guess you begin with outlook, I guess, as a child, and I was always just kind of positive, or whatever I wanted, I went out and got myself, so I never dealt with it as if I lacked something. It's just I would want more or something like that. So that, I guess it started as a kid, and eventually I took on the philosophy of the glass being half full as opposed to half empty. And so I guess it's from there.
Can you give us a real-life example?
Oh, well, let's see. I just completed a movie, MVP, that is going to Sundance.
It's going to Sundance?
Yeah!
Congratulations!
Thank you very much.
That's quite an accomplishment.
Thank you. First one. I'm just the producer on it, though, not the talent. We had a very talented director. Who's really responsible. But in producing the movie, I would never focus in the need of the financing of the movie. So I would only say, okay, we need the script. So we work on the script. And once that is complete, we would hire a staff to do the administrative work for the movie. Then we would say we raise funds. Then we would get the actors. So at different stages, we would just keep working and working, but we'd never say. So we built a momentum as opposed to always looking that you needed this enormous amount of money all at once. So I took a different approach. And a lot of times, it was funny, in the industry, I always say, do you have your money? And I would say, no, I don't worry about that. The universe will take care of that, but we got the script, so it's like you do that, so I start on the positive in that way.
Thanks for that example.
Okay.
So you are a trained psychologist?
Yes.
And how do you think that impacts your outlook?
Well, I don't know if I was drawn to psychology because of my outlook, and which then furthers just to enhance it. I think that usually is the case. It's like you have a certain outlook and then you think you're drawn to a profession that will enhance that. So for me, psychology has helped me to communicate with other people, I would say, in terms of their understanding and helping impart information to them. So I think that's really psychology has been very beneficial.
What do you think about this new branch of positive psychology?
Oh, I think it's very nice. I think it's very important. I think it's something that I think it's not necessarily new, but I mean it's one of those bold news. It's something that did not get their full attention because psychology for years has just been based upon negative, pathology, right? And it's if again, as if that was the center crux of what people's existence. But I think the positive psychology is probably more appropriate because you really are focusing on giving people the tools or assisting them to gain tools to work on their own life, because you really have to change your own. Someone can make you happy, you can only help give them the tools to become happy.
And you're saying one attribute of that would be the choice of deciding to look at the glass as half full.
Yes, that's it. And but the whole notion, I think, of happiness and positivity, is that you have to think that it's be positive that things are going to come for you. Also understanding that things come to you that you need, and so everything has a certain positive aspect to it, all your existence.
Thank goodness.
Yes.
So you're saying if you put out positivity will return to you.
Yes.
And vice versa.
Right. Whatever you put out, you get back.
Great.
Yes.
And did you want to have a few extra thoughts for our viewers?
Well, I think you have done a wonderful job. I just really enjoy being here, and you're just, you're just a bundle of happiness. You just don't see that often.
Thanks, George.
Well, thank you for having me on your program.
Sure thing. And if our viewers wanted to get in touch with you, how would they
Well,
go
you
about
can
that?
get my email is grnnamdi@aol.com.
Perfect.
Thank you.
Perfect. And this is Amy Branch signing off. With always being happy.
Happiness is powerful, it's our underlying need. Happiness is why we live each day. Happiness is destiny. So let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy. Yeah, let's be so very happy.